Well, I think we are live. Let me just wait to see. Yes, I think so. G'day everyone, popping in for, well, it's a bit later than our usual chat on Wednesdays. Aaron is actually sick this morning. Let me just start a timer actually. Where are we? Where does that hide? Let me start this up. Be close enough. Yep, there we go. Yeah, Aaron's sick today, so we're not going to do our usual behind the photo show, but I thought rather than missing our whole week, I'd pop in with some news and stuff like that we could discuss together. So I am later than usual. We also have had daylight savings start here in Australia now, so timeline's a little bit different as well. But we will be back again next week. The normal time, which is 8 p.m. New York time. That's the time we pop on each week. So we'll be back next week. So I'm going to cross to the chat in a minute. We are in a little bit of a pre-show just to start because this was unscheduled. So I want to give time for people to know that I'm live. So let's just sort of wait a few minutes. I'll pop over to the chat and see who's actually here. So if you are in here, say hi in the chat. So Dree Day's here, and the other thing is too, popping in a bit later, we might get some new people popping over as well. Eli's here as well. Langston's here, saying evening, everyone. Andy's also here. Hello, Dave. Oslo's saying hey there, Dave. Yeah, please get well soon, Aaron. Kerry's also sick at the moment. She's been off work for a week as well. She's got this really bad cough and a cold, so hopefully she's going to get better in a couple of days as well. So there's a bit of sickness around, which is a bit of a nuisance. So let me know what you're up to, everyone. Also, I'm going to show you something really cool as well, because something on the... I was talking about using the iPhone 11 Pro Max just recently for video. But one of the things I thought was I'd love to be able to control the recording manually and use ND filters. And something... I just found, which is amazing. I can't believe I just thought of it and I thought I'll try that, and it works fantastic. And I thought I'll show it to you all like in this sort of pre-show part because it's so cool. And I thought, wow, this is going to let me control fully what I'm doing on my iPhone with variable NDs, because at the moment there's nothing I've been able to find where you can use a variable ND on your iPhone or any phone that I've got easily, but I just thought I'd try it and it worked beautifully. So what is it? Well, if you're following me, you will have seen that I recently did a review of this little thing, which is it's a screw-on adapter that goes onto the front of the lens, and you just have another part which is here that screws into your lens like that. And it works great, apart from if you're using really wide angle stuff, because you can't. It will show if you say use it on the 28 to 75. You do get vignetting that shows on the 28 to 75. But this is from, if anyone's asking, it's about $20 odd, and it's from UU Rig. I'll just show you where it's from. It's UU Rig and it's the R67. But what I've found is that if I use this on my phone, I can actually drop it over my phone like this, close that up, and it works fantastic. Like, it's brilliant. I can then use the ND to control my exposure. No vignetting or anything. And I thought, this is brilliant. Because I was trying to think of some way I could come up with a simple solution to use with my phone to let me get, like I said, control. Let me just start this for a second. And it doesn't impede the screen. Like you can see here, if let me just close this. It doesn't impede the screen. So it does fit just over the top like that. And all I have to do is, if I'm controlling it, I just hold it and then I can just turn the ND to get the exposure that I want. And there's no vignetting showing. Brilliant. And it's not designed for that. Like I thought, wow, this is fantastic. So I can use something like Filmic Pro, and now I can say shoot in 4K 24p. I can lock the exposure and the ISO in and use the variable ND to get the true filmic look, which is what I couldn't do before. The problem was, if you don't use an ND like that, well, obviously it has to crank the shutter speed right up and you do get that little bit of a jerky motion. Whereas this way, I can control it just like I can when I'm on my cameras. And it sits there, it doesn't come off. How good is that? Seriously. For I think it's $26. Brilliant solution. I can't believe it. Oh, you beauty. I've got to now go and do a film so I can test it. But fantastic. When the filter size, yeah, I love it. Eli said when the filter size is 20 times bigger than the phone. I mean, there probably will be some other solution, Eli, but at the moment I haven't got one. So this is certainly going to give me something that I can use as a temporary solution to let me control the shutter speed, which is, like I said, all I'm really after. Flying High and Low says, hi from India. Now it's festival season. Oh, fantastic. So there's a lot to take photos of. That's fantastic. Three Trees is here as well. Michelle is here. Good evening, David. G'day, Michelle. Rui saying, hello, everyone. Also said, thumbs up, everyone. Yeah, please give thumbs up because it lets people know that I'm live because this isn't the usual time, guys. So I really would appreciate it if you could give some thumbs up. I've got a few stories that we're going to share. They're more general news stories, though, today. Which is like our normal behind the photo show. Like I said, Aaron is sick. I'll start the show in a few minutes. I'll just give it another 5 minutes. Hero said, greetings, dude. Eli says, yeah, that when the filter is 20 times bigger than the camera. I love it. Robert says, wow, my first live show. So excited. Well, welcome, Robert. Good to see you in here. Elliot is also saying cheers. Now, just as a side note too, I do know that if you are from the Sony realm, let me just see if I can open this up. That there's a problem with the Godox lenses that I might discuss with you. Let me just open up Facebook. And let me open up the Photography Videography School. Let me see if I can find that post. Hannah, who's another Aussie, posted this. He messaged me yesterday to say that there was a problem with Godox equipment. Kerry's bringing me in a lovely coffee. Thank you, my darling. I've just said how sick you are. Oh. Just pop in and say hi. You don't want to, do you? No, she doesn't want to.
Not really.
That's all right. You can see part of your face there. Let me just see if I can find this. Thanks for the coffee, hun. Where was it that Hannah posted it? I might search him. Let me just see if I can search him. I can't find it. All right, here we go. All right, let me just open this up because I wanted to share this with you. Hannah is saying that, let me just move this over here. I'll do it here. Hannah is actually saying that there is an issue with Godox on the A9 II it'll be, and also the A7R4. He's saying that just wanted to give everyone a heads up. Godox speedlights don't work 100% on the new A7R4 and possibly the A9 II due to the new hot shoe. So it's got to do with the way the hot shoe now is made on those two cameras, that you can put that new microphone adapter on and things like that. There's new electronic pins at the end of it that are apparently giving the Godox flashes a problem. Now, apparently it will work if you've got the trigger on, but if you stick the flash on, it won't work. Now, he's saying that you can't use TTL and things like that, and obviously they're just firing in manual, but it will work if you put the trigger on. But he's saying he thinks that they'll upgrade it with firmware. So if you are using the A7R4, or obviously going to have the same problem if you've got the A9 II, hopefully Godox will be able to issue a firmware update that will enable you to use the flash. So I just wanted to give that as a bit of a news sort of bulletin if you are running amongst that sort of thing. Don't forget too, guys, if you are, that join us on this group here, which is the Photography Videography School. Let me just move this over here so I can just talk about it before we get started. Why hasn't that come up? It's a bit weird. Oh, it's over here. Yeah, so if you do want to join us, it's called the Photography and Videography School. You do have to put the ampersand in to find us. But please join us on this site now. We're up to now, what are we now? 5,424 members. This is well, it's an extension of my YouTube channel, also Aaron's as well. We've got some fantastic people. Moderators are amazing in this group. It's a safe place though, guys. We don't allow bullying or any, like being aggressive, slamming people, things like that. But it's fantastic. If I click on, basically you'll see that I've put a note up to say that I'm going to come on live now. We've got all stuff, video and stills, like Matthew has put on a thing about how to edit with Final Cut Pro. October Colors, we've got some great stuff. Rashid has put a thing on talking about using the Blackmagic 4K camera and the Lumix 12 to 35. So he's put up some footage about that. And everyone comments about that too. Gerald's always posting amazing things. He's actually talking about at my visit to WPPI. Don't forget, guys, I'm coming out for 4 weeks in February. So I'm going to have time to hang around with, obviously, all the Americans and people that are coming out for WPPI, because it's the biggest wedding sort of expo trade show of its type. So I'll obviously be able to meet people from all around the world. And then we'll be going to Europe the following year. So I will be then meeting up with you guys in Europe the following year. So stay tuned for information about that. But the trip that we're going up to the States in February, we're going to have a week in LA. Then we're going to do the Disneyland stuff and things like that. Then we're going to go to Vegas and do some shooting around Vegas and also WPPI. I'm hoping that Gerald and others can organise some desert shoots for us. And you're welcome to tag along. No charges. Please tag along. Join us for these shoots. We're going to have a ball shooting around Vegas and the canyons and things like that. Then I'll be going back to LA. Then I'm going to drive up to Yosemite and also to San Francisco. So I'll probably have a meet-up in San Francisco as well. And then we're going to drive back to Vegas for a little bit. But stay tuned for that. It's going to be really amazing fun. And I'd love to meet you all, as many as we can. There's all releases in here. So please join us, guys. It's a fantastic little site that's an extension, like I said, of YouTube. Very, very safe. We don't allow most of the crap that goes on the web where you can't post anything without being, really blasted. He also shows a lot of his work. The A6000 shows just what you can do with an A6000 and the Sony 85 1.8 and things like that. So please join us on there. All right, guys, what we're going to do now, I'm just going to close that. Let me just start the show. So I'll put it on the Oslo Images thing and then we'll start. Good afternoon, everyone. Or let me put down here, show start. What are we? Oh, I might just start it there. I did the timer and then I didn't start it. Why isn't that starting? Start stopwatch. Okay, it's on now. G'day, everyone. This is not our normal Behind the Photo show. Aaron is sick. He contacted me this morning to say that he wasn't able to do the show today. He's nearly better, but he still wasn't well enough to do the show. So I thought I'd do one a little bit different than usual. It's similar things because it's just stories, new stories about photography and all a different range of things. But, it's obviously not got both of us talking. We won't be showing sort of that sort of thing. So I thought rather than miss the whole week, I'd just do a show live for you guys and put it on a bit later so others may be able to join us as well. I've got a stack of stories actually to show you today. I'm going to be talking about a few different things. Some lenses, new cameras, a new Samsung phone, Nikon stuff and everything. So we're going to have a talk about a whole stack of stuff, which should be really quite interesting. And we'll have a general Q&A at the end or during the show so you can pop away with the chat. Let me just check in here if anyone's asking anything before we actually start. Elliot's just saying cheers to... Eli says, have you upgraded to Catalina? No, I'm not going to at this stage due to the fact that I still use some 32-bit programs. And I'm also going to talk about that in one of the stories today because there's been some issues with Photoshop and Lightroom, and I'll discuss that soon. Just coffee with my Sony mug. So I haven't upgraded to that yet, no. Three Trees said that company called Moment has a lot of new iPhone camera attachments. Yeah, I'm not sure if they have any for the iPhone 11 yet, though, Three Trees. I'll have to see. Langston said, yes, get well, please, Kerry and Aaron. Elliot said, Catalina issues with Lightroom. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that soon. Just David Ministry says, beautiful couple. You've got a sweet wife, bro. Yeah, she's lovely. I love her to death. TC Production says, hi, David from South Africa. G'day, TC. The multi-interface shoe is, what's causing issues with that Godox flash. The group is where the cool kids hang out. Yeah, thanks, Langston. It is, isn't it? Chad said, return the A7R4 and picked up two A7R3s. There are A7R4 units that have focusing issues, and mine was one. Oh, wow. Particularly the AFC. What was wrong with it, Chad? What did you have going wrong? But you know what? I still think that the A7R3 is probably one of the best value cameras out there at the moment. The price that you can pick that up for is ridiculous. I mean, it really is super cheap. I mean, it's still a lot of money, but it's super cheap compared to what, say, paying for the A7R4. And remember, you're still getting 40-odd megapixels. Focus on the A7R3 is amazing. It's not as good as the R4, of course, because you don't get the tracking and things like that. But you wouldn't say that the A7 III is bad at focus at all. It's actually amazing. So that's one great thing about that. I mean, if you don't need 60 megapixels, the A7R3 is an amazing pickup. Aaron bought that, for instance, and he loves it. He's wrapped with it. Also, the money that you save, you can then go out and buy a really great lens. Because remember, the money you save, if you're battling for funds, you could, say, go out and buy a 24mm 1.4 or something like that. You know, I mean, or put it towards a 135 or something like that. I mean, you're saving a lot of money. And you're still getting an amazing camera. So don't feel like you do always have to go out and get the latest and best and newest. The same thing can be said about the A9. I mean, I've got one way of thinking. What I'm thinking about the A9 is, due to the fact that, yes, look, there are, 40 changes apparently, if you look at it. But the really big differences about that camera, or the things that aren't different, it's got the same sensor in it. Like the R4 is a new sensor. It goes from 60 megapixels now, whereas the R3 was 42 or something like that. The A9 is basically, it has got the same sensor. Yes, so because it's later software and things like that, you might find that you get a slightly better result. But I don't think the differences are enough to really justify that for me. If you're a sports shooter, yes, because you need those networking features and things like that, which would make a massive difference if you're a sports shooter. But for someone like me that loves the A9 for, say, doing events and weddings and just general work, it's not worth it for me to upgrade to the A9 too, particularly to pay 7,000 Australian, which is what it is. I think you're better off to buy the original A9, because that is still going to be a fantastic camera for the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years at least. Now, the thing I'm thinking, though, is that because the differences aren't so great, and I'm talking about sensor, frames per second, things like that, that just aren't going to be as drastic as what we thought it was going to be. It's the same 24 megapixel sensor. I don't think the A9 will drop that much. The A7R3 has dropped quite a lot due to the fact that it is a totally different sensor. You've jumped up from having a 40 megapixel sensor up to a 60 megapixel sensor. You've got the tracking that's involved with that. You've got the ability to change that focus point. So they're things that you could say, well, yes, it might be worth stepping up from the A7R3 to the A7R4. But you haven't got that with the A9. So I think it might be something to think about that. Remember, you can now, with the latest firmware, I do think Sony sort of shot themselves in the foot a little bit, and I'm glad that they did it. But I do think that they shot themselves in the foot a little bit by releasing the firmware version that they did on the A9, because that is incredible. And I think the A9, it's far better value, I believe, unless you're a sports, and I'm talking about professional sports shooter, where you need that networking, like the gigabit Ethernet networking and things like that. If you don't need that, I think you're better off to get the A9 and get a decent lens with the money that you save. but I don't think we're going to see the drastic price drops like what we saw with the A7 III, due to the fact that it's not such a big upgrade. You know, it really is an A9 1.5. It's not an A9 II. No matter what people try to convince me that with 48 differences or whatever that they're talking about, it's the same sensor, same frames per second, you've got the same megapixels, and I think that the image is probably going to be indistinguishable from the previous version. And look, like I said, if you're a sports shooter, yes, but if you're not, I would be just sticking with the A9 I. So I don't think you're going to find that you're going to get the same discounts on the original A9 that you've got with the A7 III, which I think has dropped dramatically. I think you can get that now for around $2,000, which is amazing camera for that sort of money. I don't think you'll see that with the A9 II, the A9 I. I've got a feeling that the A9 may stay at its current price that it is now. You know, and you'll probably see that, like here in Australia, for instance, there's no way I'm going to pay $7,500, which is what it is here in Australia, for the A9 Mark II, when it's not a big enough difference to what I've already got in the A9 for me. I know I'm going to get the other people saying, yes, but it's a sports shooter, but it's not for me. The A9 is the best camera that I've got for me for shooting the type of work that I do, which is dance, weddings, things like that, where I do love to use a silent shutter. I do like to use 20 frames per second. And, you know, there just hasn't been those improvements for me. I don't need the networking improvements that are there. I don't need the slightly better autofocus, because the A9 is amazing. I mean, it's more than what I ever need. It's the best focusing camera that I've ever seen, so I don't need to pay, you know, $4,000 or $3,000 extra to get those slight benefits for me. So it's going to be interesting. So let me know what you think about that in the comments, though, because someone is just saying there that you can get the, what was it, the A9 II, I think they were talking about, for $2,000. I got the A9 for $2,200 lightly used. That's fantastic, mate. I mean, if you can get the A9 for that sort of money now, you've got a bargain. You really have. And that money that you're saving from getting the, instead of getting the A9 II, is, like I said, you've got the money to go out and buy a beautiful lens, you know, like the 24 or the 135, something like that. It's amazing. Or get, the, you know, the Tamron 28 to 75 and the 17 to 28. So it's just worth thinking about, you know, and like I said, I always tell it from my perspective. I just don't think the A9 II is worth the money they're asking unless you're a professional sports photographer. But that's just my opinion. If you're a professional sports photographer, yes, definitely get it. All right, so let's go on to story one, which is the Sigma FP I'm going to talk about today, 9450. So let's go over to here. I just wanted to bring this up because apparently this camera, that they've released something the other day which was talking about the specs of this camera, and they were saying that apparently it's going to be priced around $1,900. So that's the rumor. And there was this codes written somewhere in part of the webpage or something that someone found, and it was about I think it was $1,850 or something like that. But there is some interesting things about this little camera. There's obviously no viewfinder though, so it is an issue if you need a viewfinder. Whether there's going to be attachments or something or whatever onto this, I'm not sure. But it looks like it's got some interesting things in this. They're saying it's a pocketable full frame. So this is tiny. It's probably going to be the smallest full frame interchangeable camera that's out there. It's got a Bayer sensor apparently. But where this is interesting is that they're saying that in here that it's going to have, I think it was 12-bit video focusing on this. Let me just keep going down to see if I can see something that where they talk about that. They're showing this image here, showing how it can be used as you know, in different setups and things like that. But down here, they're saying it weighs 370 grams. It's only 112.6 by 69.9 by 45.3 millimeters. It really is tiny. It's 35 millimeter full size effective, and it's 24.6 million pixels Bayer sensor. What else is it saying? It's got a built-in heat signature structure. Now, what I was amazed though about, I think it's a fully electronic shutter. I don't know if there is a mechanical shutter. I think it may be just an electronic shutter. But the part that I thought was incredible about this is that it was 12-bit. Where did it mention that? Oh, here we go. It says here that for video data, the Sigma FB supports 12-bit cinema DNG, which is amazing. Now, that is external. With 4K UHD 24 frames per second recording, it produces video data that can be used even in filmmaking. It's all-eye recording, which is optimal for editing in H.264, compressed videos. It has video output. It uses USB 3.1. But that was the main thing I thought when I saw that. I thought, wow, it's using 12 bits. So for actual editing, grading, this would be incredible, I think. It has a nice little button up the top that you can just switch between recording stills and your sign, which is interesting how they call it cinema. Your record button's just on the top. I'm just trying to see if it mentions anything else. It is a electronic shutter though, so there's no hot shoe by the look of it, so you're not going to be able to use a flash and things like that with this. It looks to me more like it's going to be for video shooting, but you can do stills on it obviously as well. But another interesting factor as well about this is that it has built-in HDR. You can see that shown here. It says it takes an over, under, and then it'll give you HDR exposure in camera. It's got cinemagraphs built in, and you can see that there where you can, stop the image and then also have parts of the image moving. I do like the fact that you can also put in curves. So you've got full manual control of curves here as well for tones. Seems like a really nice camera. I mean, it's interesting. So there's no 4K 60 though, but you have at least you've got 12-bit. I mean, we're pushing to get 10-bit. This gives you actual 12-bit video recording. So, boy, pretty interesting release. I'd like to have a look at this when it comes out. I suppose it will have picture profiles. I'm just trying to see down here. It mentions, yes, it has. I think it's probably got S-Log or something down here. It's got land sign. I'm not sure what all these mean. It might be their own terminology for your log type cameras. Well, we know it does HDR, but interesting. Let me know what you think about it. Does that interest any of you? I'm certainly interested to see how Sigma, though, have now moved into the camera market, though. It's quite interesting that they've done that. Obviously, it's going to take the Sigma lenses. I'm not sure what mount it takes, though, yet. I'm not sure if it mentions that. Let me just see main features. I'm just trying to see if it mentions what mount it is. It's probably the Canon mount or something. It is full-time electronic shutter. It has a color mode, teal and orange. That's a really fashionable thing at the moment that everyone's shooting. Well, that's built in. So it does seem to be that this is really made for video type features. It does have face and eye detection, focus peaking. Oh, it's an L mount. Okay, so it's the part of the, I should do Jaron Poland's L mount alliance. L mount alliance. Yeah, I'd have to put some echo on that. So it's an L mount. Yeah, and then I suppose you're probably going to be able to buy adapters if you want to use other lenses. Because the L mount at the moment's got this 45 2.8, 35 1.2, and the 14 to 24 2.8, but they're very expensive. Now it's saying here that they're going to have a Sigma mount converter, enables the use of Sigma SA mount and Sigma's Canon. Okay, so that's not so bad, but I don't know whether what the autofocus and everything will be like the second that you put these other converters on there. But I've got the Sigma MC11 myself, and that seems to be fantastic. So, it probably will be okay. The other thing too, it says it supports all of these accessories, but I'm not sure how these work, where you're obviously getting all these adapters and stuff like that on. I'd have to have a look at that and see how it works. It supports raw video data. I can't get over that. That's incredible. 12-bit raw data is unbelievable. Seamless transition between stills as well. Anyway, let me know about that, what you think about it. Let's go to the next story, because this is an interesting discussion, and I wanted to bring this up to you. Let me just put the time, 17:08. So this I saw, and I wanted to have a discussion, like leave your comment down below, and I'd love to know in the live chat what you think about this as well. Because I saw this on DP Review this morning. I was reading an article while I was having a coffee, and I wanted to get your opinion, because they're saying when fast-ish is fast enough. The whole article is saying in praise of using f1.8 lenses. And this is a really interesting discussion. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'll read parts of it, and then you can let me know in the comments whether you think it's true or what. But they're just saying there is still demand for f1.4 and faster lenses, but that's not the same thing as saying that there is a need for them. And there's a whole discussion in here talking about how 1.4 and 1.2 lenses are just amazing and things like that. But do we need it with the latest type of cameras that are out there? And now that the lenses, the 1.8 lenses particularly, are now so sharp. Now, there's a whole thing in this discussing different lenses and things like that. The first article that comes up is talking about faster lenses let in more light. And more light is always good, and that's what they're talking about here. Now, what this is discussing is that what they're saying is that if you have say a 1.4 lens, that you gain roughly a 2/3 of a stop over 1.8. Now, that can mean the difference of, say, shooting, and it's mentioned in the article, say, for instance, that you're shooting something here that is 1/15 of a second or 1/25 of a second, and that's the best you can get, letting as much light as you can at 1.8. So if you're shooting at 1.8 and you want to, say, not increase the ISO so much, you could say have 1/15 of a second. Well, if you have a 1.4 lens, that immediately goes up to 1/25 of a second. So that's how much you're saving here. Now, if you have stabilization in your camera and also in the lens, you can easily hold at 1/25 of a second. You might not be able to hold at 1/15 of a second. So that's the sort of difference it is between, say, shooting at 1.4 as against 1.8. So that's what that's talking about there. But then it starts talking about ISO in this situation, and they're saying that it might be... where was it saying? 2/3 of a stop is the difference between using ISO 640 and ISO 400. So that's the difference between shooting a 1.8 lens as against a 1.4 lens. So if you're in a 1.8 lens, you would be using ISO 640. If you're on a 1.4, you would be using ISO 400. But then the article starts talking about, well, is ISO really a problem nowadays? And I don't think it is, because I often now will go up to 6400. I'll even go much higher than that now. And I've found that as long as you expose correctly, and this is the trick that you have to understand, if you are shooting in low light scenarios where you're going to up your ISO, it's critical that you don't underexpose, because where does the noise live? The noise lives in the shadow area, and that's something that you have to understand here, that the second you underexpose to, say, protect a highlight, well, then if you do try and bring that up and you've used, say, 6400 ISO, you're going to have an awful lot of noise in the shadow, because your noise resides in the shadows. So that's an issue. So the trick here is to make sure that if you're using high ISOs, that you don't underexpose. You're actually a little bit better to go a little bit over. Now, yes, the highlights may be sacrificed in that situation, but that's probably going to be better than really having terrible noise that's showing in your images. I tend to rarely go over much, but I will, because I'll try and protect the highlights. But I will definitely not underexpose. So I will shoot for the ambient, but not underexpose. So that way I don't have to push the shadows up much at all, or at all. And that's the secret. The great part is if you're a little bit over and then you bring the exposure down, that will hide the noise. So that's another way of looking at this as well. So if you nail the exposure or you're a fraction over, having high ISO is not really an issue these days. People are always saying to me, David, how do you get such clean images at high ISO? And it's due to the fact that I nail the exposure all the time. I will try and nail it and definitely do not underexpose. I underexpose all the time if I'm shooting in good lighting, but if I'm shooting in bad lighting or low lighting, I will never underexpose, and that's the secret. So what the article is saying there is that, is having a faster glass now really that important, say between a 1.8 lens and a 1.4 lens, due to the fact that you can now raise your ISO so high in these latest sensors? Because all of the newer cameras particularly are great in ISO. All the Sony cameras like the A9, the A7 III, the A7R III, the A7 III is incredible, the A7R4, the Nikon Z series of cameras, the Z7, Z6, they're all amazing in low light. Terrific, actually, in fact. So is a 1.4 lens really necessary? And I'm not saying it's not or it is. I just want to have you have a think about this. If you continue to go down, they say that faster lenses make for more attractive images. Well, and they're talking about bokeh, and I think we do, as photographers, have an obsession sometimes with bokeh. I don't think the client gives a hoot about it, to be completely honest about it. I don't think they would care if the image was shot at 2.8 and 1.4 or 1.8. I really don't think they care. In fact, I have heard, and I showed it a story recently where the bride complained because she was upset that the photographer shot everything wide open and she couldn't see the beautiful backgrounds of the area that she'd hired for her wedding. So that's quite interesting in itself. So what you've got to be careful of here, and I changed my thinking as well, and I often do now shoot a lot of wedding images at 5.6, due to the fact that I want to show the environment where the couple is. You know, if they've hired this beautiful location, you don't want the location to look like this image here, which basically would blow out the image, in other words. You don't want to blow out that image. Yes, it's nice to have some separation, but you don't want every single image to be completely blown out in the background. You do want to show some of these beautiful locations where people are. So you have to be careful about shooting wide open all the time. And this is showing the difference between, say, shooting at 1.8 and 1.4. So you can see the smaller image here, and I'll leave the links down for this down below, so you can have a look at this yourselves. But this is at 1.8 here, and then if you're looking at 1.4, you can see there that that's 1.4. So you're getting a difference of how much the background will change between 1.8 and 1.4. Now this can also depend too on how close you are to your subject, obviously, how far away from the subject you are. If you're a lot further away, then there's much less difference between 1.8 and 1.4. If you're much closer to the subject, you'll see that the background actually sort of blows out a lot more between 1.4 and 1.8. So it's different. The other thing too, they're saying in this article that, you know, sometimes to get a really sharp image, you do have to close them down. Like a lot of 1.4 lenses, you have to say stop down to 1.8 to get the best images. I noticed with the 55, for instance, and these new lenses like the Nikon lens that just came out, those lenses, the 1.8 lenses for the Z6 cameras, they're tack sharp at 1.8. So you don't have to push those down a lot. The wider the lens is, you do have to stop them down, like the Canon the 85 1.2. If you do want that to be really sharp, you do have to stop that down to about 1.8 or f2. They often say the sweet point on a lot of these lenses is about 5.6. So it's interesting. So if you're after sharpness of lenses, you often have to step them down anyway. So that's another thing too over that as well. So they're saying, you know, a faster lens stop down is sharper than a slower one that is wide open. It's a really interesting discussion. They're also talking about disadvantages of ultra-fast lenses as well, which you can read as well if you'd like to. Talking about cost, weight, and size, obviously. Remember, if you're looking here, like a 50mm Canon, there's two here. This is the 1.8, whereas the 50mm 1.2. You can see the difference in size here that you're dealing with. This is why I love my 55 so much, the Sony 55 1.8, because it's tiny. It's that small, it's tiny, it's dead sharp. Fantastic if you're shooting video on a gimbal, because it's so small. You know, if you compare that to, say, I haven't got it, say using my Batis, or if you had the 85 1.4, is really quite heavy. You know, say compare the Sony 85 1.8 to the Sony 85 1.4. The 85 1.8 is much lighter, much cheaper. And the 85 is much faster. Like, there's interesting things sometimes that you've got to look at. The more glass that you've got to move, the harder it tends to get. The exception seems to be this one, because the GM 24 1.4, they've done some voodoo or something with this. It's exceptionally fast, light, small. They really have done an amazing job, Sony, with this one. Generally, if you're talking about having a 1.4 lens, it will be a 24. It's going to be a big honking lens. If you look at what Sigma and companies like that do, you'll get a better idea of what size usually that these are. Sony have done an incredible job with this lens, and plus that's sharp, wide open. So it's interesting, you know, and I'm going to talk about this 58 0.95 a bit later as well. That we can discuss as well. He's saying, though, in here that just one more thing. Speaking of price brings me to one flaw in my argument, but he is saying that the new lenses particularly, like if you're looking at the Nikon's series lenses, the 1.8 lenses are actually dearer than their digital SLR lenses. So the 1.8 mirrorless lenses are very, very expensive. So that's something that you have to consider as well. But it's an interesting article. Love to know what you guys think. Let me open up the chat because I want to see if you have any questions. Let me know, do you really think that's an interesting article, guys? Or do you think that you would just prefer to go to, say, a 1.4 lens immediately? Let's just open up the chat for a couple of minutes. I just want to see what people were saying. Where are we? So we've got a stack of stuff there, people talking about the 1.8 here. Langston says, I'm wondering what the play is here, but a lot of signal lean towards holding back for some reason. Are you talking about the A9 II, Langston? Mark said the A9 had to be updated for pro sports for the transfer rate, etc. Yeah, like I said, I do think it's a valid update, definitely for sports photographers. And I suppose Sony have now decided that that's totally where they... The funny thing was, Sony were caught in a funny place with the A9, because when that came out, they were advertising that as like the ultimate sports camera and everything else. But I found it was the best camera that I could use for my needs. I love the 24 megapixel file size. I love the focusing of that. I love the 20 frames per second. The silent shutter is a game changer for me for doing weddings, events and things like that. And having the 1/32,000th of a shutter speed on there is also incredible. You know, to be able to shoot that wide open if you need it, and not be limited to the 1/8000th of a shutter speed. So they're all things that are incredible, but they're things that haven't changed in the new version for me. So the A9 II for me is just not worth it. So if you're in the marketplace what it's for, it's a great upgrade. And that's what I'm saying, Mark. I'm not bagging it in that regard. I'm just saying for me, or for a user like me, the A9 II is not worth it. And that's, I'm just telling the truth of how I see it. Particularly with the new A9 firmware upgrade that came out. It's really just not worth it. PhotoMX says, yes, Mark, it's a flagship camera. They could have at least given it 10-bit video. Yeah, I know. Sony really are holding back in the video stakes at the moment for some reason. I don't understand why. Mark said the A9 II is just not for you, PhotoMX. That's why they released the A7R4 and they are still doing the S3. Photomix said, that's true, Mark. It's not for me, but the specs are specs, and the A9 II in all its glory is missing some key specs. I'm loving LumaFusion. That's good to say that. My laptop is practically useless now. I am still trying to learn it. I just haven't had time, but I will get to learn it more myself. Like I said, the idea for me is to learn LumaFusion so I can do my editing when I come to the States next year to keep videos going as well. Photomix says the R4 is missing key specs and the S3 is just missing. I like it. Mark said, Photomix missing for you but not for sports photojournalists. Let's face it, this camera was specifically released for the Olympics. Photomix says, yeah, LumaFusion is dope. I just can't get with editing on the iPad. Robert said, no interest unless it took Sony lenses. Not sure what that meant. Photomix says, I get it, Mark, but that won't stop people with money to burn from buying it. David doesn't shoot sports, yet he has the A9. Exactly, Photomix. This is where I think Sony didn't underestimated what the A9 would actually be for. Because, like I said, I still believe it. It's the best camera I've ever owned. Like I said, it just meets all of my needs as a wedding, portrait, dance photographer. I mean, you know, it's just the ability to freeze that perfect moment can be the difference for me getting that perfect dance shot or not. You know, I mean, if we look at this, and I was lucky on this one because I did get this with the A7 III. If you look at this image here, let me just go over here. I was lucky in this situation because this was shot with the A7 III. And in this situation, well, if I'd had the A9, I could have got this more perfect because to get a perfect dance pose on this foot and hand will basically almost be touching, like it'll be dead on. Now, I had to time this quite specifically with the A7 III due to the fact this only had 10 frames. I shouldn't say only, but an extra 10 frames does make a massive difference when you're doing this sort of work. If you've got the A9, you would have the difference of the hand touching the feet and getting the perfect stuff dead straight. So that's the difference between, say, shooting something like this with, say, an A7 III or any other camera that's out there and, say, shooting with the A9. The A9, and I've used it constantly over and again. The reason why I didn't use the A9 on this day was because I was shooting the video on the A9. Because as I've mentioned before, I think the A9 video is the nicest video that's out there. And I use the A9 for video. So that's why I shot with the A7 III here, because I was shooting video at the same time. But the A9 would have done a better job here. It would have grabbed a fraction better of a moment, and that's the difference. This is why I love using the A9. So the A9 is not just for sports photographers. That's what Sony are trying to market it at, but it's not. Anyone that uses the A9 that's using it for things like I do, like for weddings, events, portraits or dance shoots that I do, concerts, all that sort of stuff, understands how good the A9 is for that. So, yes, the new version is for sports photographers, yes, because those updates don't help someone like me at all. There's no difference in that new camera for what I would use it for. It's same sensor, probably same dynamic range. It might be a fraction better, but I bet on paper you can't, or when you look at it, you can't see it. Same resolution, same frames per second. So nothing has changed in that regard. So for me, it's a mediocre release. For a sports shooter, yes, I can understand that. Mark said Sony should have called the A9 something like the Olympic A9, maybe not too much sound like the Olympics. I think they did make the mistake of calling it an A9 II because it's not an A9 II. It should have been an A9 something. Yes, I agree. Like I said, it's more like an A9 1.5. That's what you'd say. I love 1.8, so do I. Like, I love my Batis. I love the Batis 85 1.8. I love the Sony 55 1.8. They're amazing lenses. They really are amazing. Lanson said, I find the dynamic range of my Sony's f1.8 is a great value for me when shooting events. They're incredible. Like I said, still my favourite video lens is the 55 1.8. I've been wondering why I buy big heavy lenses for 1.4. Well, Robert, they still are beautiful. Like I said, I love the 24 1.4. It's beautiful, but I never really have had that. But I must admit, I would love to try the Canon 85 1.2. I'd love to try that to just see how smooth that background is. Not that I want to shoot with it all the time, but you know, I would like to sort of try that. I love my 135 1.8 Sony G Master. That's my favorite lens I've got at the moment. I adore that, and that's 1.8. It's brilliant. My FE85 is my favorite lens, yeah, and I can totally understand. That's one of Sony's best performing and best price lenses that you can buy. Sony was pressured by YouTubers into releasing the A9 II. I don't think so. I think they did release something that was needed by pro sports photographers. Remember, getting the stuff online for them is critical. So having gigabit Ethernet and these other things that they've got in that camera is a good upgrade for them. It's just, like I said, it's just not a good upgrade for me. But for a sports photographer, if you look at it, we have to wait for the independent reviews. And this is what I keep telling people. Don't just look at the Sony reviews at the moment and the Artesians or whoever all those people are, because they naturally have to say the right thing or they won't be Sony Artesians anymore. I mean, that's how you have to look at it. If they're sponsored by Sony, they are not going to say a bad thing about that camera. They can't, because they're basically paid by Sony, so they can't. Wait for the independent reviews to come out, the independent sports shooters that have no link to Sony, and then see what they sort of say about this, and then you'll get a true reflection of what's going on. I know Gerald said the other day, he mentioned something about that, because someone said that, yes, but I buy what David has shown. But there's a difference there in the fact that whenever anyone sends me something, it's like when this was sent to me the other day, that filter that I showed you, I did immediately say, and the funny thing was I didn't notice that on their website, I sent the guy an email to say that, thank you for sending me this, but I said this vignettes on my Tamron lens, and if anyone thinks I'm telling a lie, I've saved it and I could show you, but I said to the guy, I emailed him back and said, look, yes, thank you for sending me this, but it vignettes on my Tamron 28-75. I said I have to say that to my users because I won't lie to them and I'll tell them the truth. I said, do you still want me to do the review? And he messaged me back by email and he said, yes, David, I still want you to do it. And then I noticed when I did the review, because I opened up their website, it actually says it on their website. So they were honest about it, and that's probably why he said, yes, I'd like you to do it. But so there is a difference between how I will work, because when a company sends me stuff, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think about it. If there's faults, I'm going to tell you. But if you're paid for, if you are a Canon Artesian or whatever you like to call it, if you're a Nikon Master of Light or whatever they're called, if you're a Sony Artesian or whatever they call them, you are not going to bag Sony because you will no longer be a Sony Artesian. And I can tell you that's the truth. So they've got to be careful with what they say, or they won't be invited to the events anymore, and they certainly will not be sponsored by Sony if they start to bag their cameras. There's no way. Why do you think Sony won't have anything to do with me? There's no way that they'll come up and say exactly what I just said about the A9 II. So just wait for some independent reviews about that, because I think, you know, it's interesting. So, like I said, when I get something to review, if I don't like something, I'm going to tell you I don't like it. I usually do. The funny thing is, a lot of people contact me, and then I'll look at it to see if I think I'll even be interested in it. I knock a hell of a lot back because I think, look, I don't even think I'll have an interest in that. If I get something that will say, I got one the other day, I'm not going to say who it is, but I got one the other day to say that they would like me to review it, but before I could post it on YouTube, I had to send them the link first so they could check it to see if they thought the review was okay to them, and I knocked it back. Because that's not the way that I want to work. I don't want to be tied to what someone says. Like, I want to do the review as I see it, not how they want to see it. You know, if I'd said something negative, they probably would have made me take it out and then redo it again. So I'm not going to do that review for that company because I think that's unethical. And I wouldn't want you to buy something that I didn't believe in. So let's keep going with these questions because it's... Maybe they should be watching more YouTube at Canon. I don't know what that was about. Mark said, my models with the green eyes was shot at f2 even though I had the 50f 1.4 lens. That was a lovely shot too, Mark. That was really nice. Peter said, g'day, Peter. Good to see you in here. Congratulations on just reaching your 50,000 too. Boy, have you grown. Phonomix says, yeah, cameras are getting better with ISO, except the R1V. Yeah, that's a little bit better. But when you do downgrade it to the size of the R3, it's probably the same noise. So, Canon say YouTubers are never satisfied. Give them 4K, they want 8K. Peter said, totally agree on the exposure stuff. Yep, if you are doing high ISO, do not underexpose, guys. Critical. Peter said, I cranked the ISO up to 64 without issues. Yep, I'm exactly the same. Canon 6D focuses like one-eyed cyclops. I love it. Bokeh can work against you sometimes if they paid for a nice location. Yeah, and that's exactly right, Langston. I changed particularly when I went to see Yervant. I did a workshop with Yervant. If you haven't heard of him, he's one of the leading wedding photographers in the world. He's probably in the top 10. He's a local Aussie. I'm doing a workshop with him next week, actually. But he's amazing, and he shoots nearly all his weddings at 5.6. The only thing is he's now switched to the Canon. I think it was Canon before, but he's switched to the mirrorless now, the RX1. Not the RX1, the EOS Canon. Camera, which I think is a mistake, but anyway, that's what he's done. But he shoots 5.6 on nearly all his wedding shots. And when I did that course with him, he said, Dave, because I asked him why. I said, why are you shooting with all this amazing Canon, 85 1.2 lenses at 5.6? And he said, David, he said, the brides play for these beautiful locations. He said, why would I want to destroy those locations? He said, if I'm shooting wide open all the time, I could just be shooting in a car park. And I thought about it. This was a while ago that I did that workshop, and I thought, he's correct. Like, he actually is right, what he's saying. So it did change my way of thinking a little bit. And the interesting thing is that 5.6, if you're dealing with shooting on a 135, lens is still quite shallow. Like, the background is still nice and soft, but at least it's not blown out. And so that's something that you do have to consider. We're photographers. We're the only ones that do it. Like, no one else does that. It's for some reason, we have this obsession with shooting everything wide open. We want to see that beautiful bokeh all the time. Clients do not give a hoot about it. In fact, sometimes they can think there's something wrong, or they're annoyed because they paid so much money for a location and they don't get that location. So it's something you've got to think about. I will always shoot some shots wide open, but I'll always now shoot a lot of shots at 5.6. Robert said, I'm obsessed with bokeh, but nobody else I show image to ever mentioned it. Exactly, and that's photographers, Robert. That's the interesting thing that we seem to be. I don't know what it is about photographers. It's Langston says, I think we as photographers are. I know, I love it. I've just had a DP make comments about why we are paying for the location and we don't see it. Exactly, it's true. For example, 135 GM is epic at 2.8. Yep. Peter said, where was that? Oh, thank you so much, Peter. You gave me a donation. I missed that. Sorry, mate. Thank you so much, Peter, for that donation of whatever the SEK is. $20. Sorry, Peter, I missed it. It didn't come up. Where was it? Because I wanted to read that. I hate it when it drops down. Not sure. I'll have to just keep reading. Hello, David. I'm getting still older, waiting for the A7000. We all are. Can you give your thoughts on a focal reducer for APS-C? I never use them, Dan. No, I can't really, because I just don't use those. Chad said, yes, picked up the 24GM. I love it. Amazing lens. I'd still buy another version, A9 version 1. So would I. I really would. I'd buy another one for sure. In fact, if the price comes down enough, I might get another one. I'm even seriously thinking about getting an A7 III. If that price keeps dropping, I might even get that. Got the A9 for US 2,200. I mean, what a great camera for that price. That's incredible. I've gone back too far, actually. Let me go down to here. The Canon 1.4 is as fast as a lightning snail. Most of the wide lenses are. They are fairly slow. This is why a lot of the Sony lenses will be updated over time too. They'll put that silent linear shutter focusing in. They will probably end up doing the 85 again with that, because the focusing in the 135, particularly if you've used it, is incredibly fast. So they will, say, update that as well. Peter said, to each their own. I like having the option of 1.4, but I never use it just because I have it. Yep. Thanks for the donation, Peter. Wonder why the price is more expensive. Maybe the new R&D cost. Probably. They probably have to get that back. Robert said, and here's me with my Batis 85 planning to buy the GM. Well, look, the GM's a beautiful lens. I mean, it's a beautiful lens. It's just something that I've never really wanted to go for, because I'm happy with the Batis. In fact, now that I have the 135, look, I still use the Batis if I'm in tight locations, but I don't want to take the 135 off my camera. I mean, if I can do it, I will shoot with that. But if I'm in a tight location, I'll still use the 85. But I really don't want to take the 135 off. But I've never really had the need or the thought to buy the 135, the 85 1.4. Mark said, I own my fast primes, but I purchased them for their character and quality of glass, and not necessarily for the widest aperture. Yep. Langston says he would thought about owning a proper anamorphic lens set. Yeah, that'd be so cool. I'd like that myself. Michelle says, I love 1.8 primes. However, I'm saving the money for the Sigma 35 1.4. Fantastic. Great lens. For Disneyland and dark rides. Just for fun, not for work projects. David, how do you store your data? I've got two Pegasus drives. I'll show you exactly what I use. Let me just open up this. I'll show you exactly what I use. View, fit and window. So I'm using these. There's probably newer versions of these now. But I'm using these. Oh, get off there. How do you get... Oh, there. Yeah, so I'm using these as my NAS drives. I've got two of them. So one, and really I suppose it's overkill if you think about it, but these have 4 separate drives. I've got 8 gigabytes in each one, and then they're in RAID 0, so I'm RAID 6 I think I've got them in. So they can, it's either RAID 5 or RAID 6, I can't remember, but I can take a drive out. If a drive fails, and I've had that happen, the lights flash, they turn red. At the moment, they're all flashing blue, which means they're all okay. If they go red, it means a drive's died. You just pull the drive out, put your new drive back in, and it rebuilds the drive. Now, I've got 2 of them, one stacked on top of the other, and then this drive will also completely back up to the other drive on top of it. So I've got redundancy over redundancy. You know, I mean, like I said, it probably is overkill. But, you know, I just do like to make sure that I have everything protected. You just push that little thing in there and then the drive will pop out. They're Great. Thunderbolt 2 drives, or the interface is Thunderbolt 2. Just brilliant. That's how they'll open up. So you just put the new drive into the caddy through here. So that's how they work. So that's what I'm using. So I have 2 of those, one stacked on top of the other, and then I'll also back up that periodically. Particularly weddings I will do straight away. I'll back up onto another drive. I'll have that in a lockup safe that I've got here, and I have a separate drive which Kerry brings in from her work, and she takes that back to her work. So that's what I'm using for my storage. Hero says, I will always use my 105 1.4. Yep, the 105 is amazing. I love that. It was incredible. Yeah, that's true, David. Although Sony, even Nikon and Canon market these cameras for sports and photojournalists, they put the best features in their cams that also work for many other disciplines or photography. Yeah. The D5 is much better wedding camera than the D750 is, yet Nikon expects you to buy a D750 or D850 and use it for weddings. Yeah, well, that's why when I shot Nikon, I had the D4Ss. I had those cameras as my main camera for weddings. I started with the D3, I went for the D3S, then I had the D4, and then I upgraded to the D4S. That was the last Nikon camera that I owned. So I do always like those better performing sports cameras for wedding work, because I just find they're the best for events and things like that. Let me just quit that for a second. Robert said, I had the Nikon 50-0.95, sold it and got a few keepers, and it was soft wide open. Yeah, most of those are soft wide open, apart from the Nikon one that I'll talk about soon. Julian said, G'day, Julian says, I got my 24 1.4. It's awesome. It is. It's amazing. Hero said, I was going to ask what a good aperture would be when getting the background in shots, but still show a little separation. Yep, 5.6. I think 5.6 is perfect for that. What else? James said, we should thank Sony for all the updates for free. Shows they care about their customers. Exactly, James. I can't believe they gave us that update for the A9. And then particularly as the A9 II was just going to be announced. So, you know, it's terrific. Anyone else excited about the new GoPro 8, or is it just me? I got tired of waiting. No, well, it didn't. Well, I've got this one in front of me. So I've got the Osmo Action. So for me, that's enough. And I've also got the Osmo Pocket as well. So that's ample for me. But after using this, I don't want to put this down for video. The iPhone 11 is... Hey, like my screensaver? Where are we? Hang on, I'll show you. Ooh, is it going to focus? Wonder Woman. Woohoo! I love the Osmo Action and the Osmo Pocket. I mean, they're nice, but the video particularly that I'm getting from the iPhone is superb. So unless I have a need for like doing sports or something like that, or going in the water or whatever, I'll use the Osmo Action. Apart from that, I'm going to be using the iPhone 11. The other thing I love about this too for me is that I can shoot the front camera and the back camera at the same time. So doing YouTube reviews is amazing. That's brilliant. So yeah, I'm not that excited about the GoPro 8, but you may be. What else? Oh yeah, Langston says, oh man, backups on backups. Yeah, I am, but I'm just a bit paranoid about everything. What else have we got? 360. I'm hopefully going to get a 360 sent to me camera, which I'm dying to try out. Photomex says, I saw the Osmo Action, but I can't get with the Osmo's colours. They look too muted and dull. GoPro's colours look much better. Okay. All right, so let's keep going. Let's go to the next story, which is this one, talking about Lightroom and stuff. Let me just put down here. That was after that fast enough. Catalina. Catalina update, and we're 5540. I noticed that Adobe are giving a recommendation that you should not update to Catalina. If you're on a Mac, obviously if you're on Windows, don't worry about this story, but if you're on a Mac, there are some big issues showing up, particularly with plugins and things like that. It's also this could not save the document because it's saying the file can't be found. They're saying at the moment, if you're a Mac user who regularly uses Adobe Photoshop or Lightroom CC, we don't recommend updating your computer to Mac OS Catalina just yet. So they're having problems with Photoshop and also Lightroom. The Lightroom problems are there's tethering issues with Nikon, and there's also a lens profile creator is broken as well. File naming doesn't work right if you're doing that. Some plugins are broken as well. Older droplets don't work. N-Script Toolkit is broken. I don't even know what that uses because I don't use it. And the lens profile creator is broken. This is because parts of those are 32-bit software. The new version of Catalina will not allow anything 32-bit to run. Photoshop is having problems with some of the plugins. So you've got big problems in Photoshop as well. So I wouldn't upgrade at this stage. And like normally I do upgrade straight away. The problem for me is I do have a lot of 32-bit plugins and things like that. I've got audio plugins that aren't going to work. This is a massive upgrade this time. So they're no longer going to support 32-bit. Everything has to be upgraded to 64-bit applications. So they're not recommending to upgrade. In fact, you really need to check. There is software that you can check, and I think you can also do it through the Mac preferences as well. I'll have to look at that again. I've done it before. But you can check what 32-bit programs won't run on the new update. So you have to be very, very careful about upgrading. I'm not going to upgrade for a while until all of this stuff is sorted out. Running a business, I've got to be careful. I have upgraded before, and then I've had issues with plugins not working and things like that. So this time I'm going to hold off, and I'm going to hold off for a while just to make sure that everything runs correctly. So that's it. So if you are on the Mac side of things, do not upgrade to Catalina. If you're using anything 32-bit, because you're in for big trouble if you do. All right, a Nikon story. Let me bring this up. What time are we on? 58. Oops. 58:40. Talking about fast lenses, there's a picture here showing the new Nikon 85 0.95 lens. It's a ridiculous price, so it's $8,000. I mean, it's just crazy if you're looking at it. This is for the Z series cameras. It's showing you a sort of size from here. So this is the 50, I think. I don't know how you pronounce it. Nocturus, is it, or whatever? That's the 55 0.95 lens on the Sony camera, as against the 58 mm 0.95 on the Nikon camera. I just wanted to show that lens and how honking big it is. It's interesting to use a lens that's that fast, though, that would be manual focus. That would be a nightmare to focus if you're dealing with something that's wide open. But boy, if it's sort of that $8,000 price range, that's US, you'd want that lens to be sharp, wide open, wouldn't you? So it's just an interesting thing that I wanted to show you to discuss it. There is a 55 0.95. I think this is done for bragging rights on Nikon's end. Really, I'm not sure how useful this lens is going to actually be, but it's there. Sony have said that they'd like to do one as well, so it's going to be interesting. So there are 0.95 lenses, like this is the 50mm one, but there's nothing native. When I say native, there's nothing out there that Sony have produced. They're all third party. But wow, what a honking lens. $8,000 though. I mean, do you think it'll sell? It's interesting. So that's that. And lastly, I wanted to talk about this story because this is really interesting, this Samsung story. 100. Oops. 10040. This is really interesting because Samsung have come up with this new idea about having phones. Now, what they're doing here, I'm not sure what the quality is going to be like, but you know how your phone is sticking out through these outwards? Well, they're putting the sensor, and I'll show you how this works in a second, but they're going to do a telephoto lens, and it's going to work the opposite way, so that actually it works that way. The telephoto will work that way, and then it uses a prism to actually shoot out. So let me show you how this works. I'll just play this little video so you can see what's going on. So I'll show you how this works. So you can see here that what they're showing are the two camera lenses. Normally that's the way that they will work, shooting up. But they're changing the things completely the way that this is going to go. So what it's going to do, they're saying it's going to be this big, so it's much larger, this telephoto lens, but it's going sideways. And then it's using a prism to shoot back up. So this is interesting because I did always wonder how they would get some telephoto lenses to work in this type system. And this is a way of getting around it. Yeah, the phones may have to be a fraction thicker, but it certainly is a way of getting out of something that would stop the lens from having to sort of shoot out of the back of the phone itself, which is how a telephoto lens would work. So this is quite interesting. So they're saying this is going to be in the Samsung S11, a periscope tele camera. Amazing. I mean, wow. I'd never seen anything like that before, and I did wonder how it was going to be possible, but that was sort of shared in there as well. I just thought I'd like to share that with you. They're saying it'll debut in the Galaxy S11 models for next year. Unbelievable what's starting to come out of there. All right, so let's open up Q&A. Let's have a little bit of a Q&A time. Where were we? We're down here somewhere. Ben's here. G'day, Ben. How are you? I have the Osmo Action sitting in the dresser unopened, waiting for the real reviews for the GoPro Max. Too. Many paid reviews on YouTube right now. Yeah, like I said, it might pay to wait for an independent one. Luke, and this is the company bringing Photoshop to iPad, laugh out loud. Well, it's not, well, I suppose it is it is their fault. It's not Apple's, it's Adobe's fault. And they've had 18 months prior knowledge, basically, that this was going to happen. Really, there's no excuse by Adobe to make this be like that. I mean, this beta's been out for months now. There's been 18 months where Apple have said that the 32-bit apps would no longer work once Catalina was going to be announced. So yeah, Adobe do have a bit to answer for that they haven't released this. It's certainly not Apple's fault, that's for sure. I still have my Osmo Pocket, Photomix saying. Langston said, for shooting things that don't move. I'm not sure what that meant. Photomix says, it'll probably be one of the sharpest 50mm ever made, guys. It's just for the people who want the option of 0.95. They aren't going to shoot at 0.95 yet. Now, that could make a difference, though, if you were shooting in very, very low light. And remember, I sometimes shoot in receptions and things like that where I don't want to raise the ISO, and I'll shoot at 1.4. As long as whatever you're focusing on is not close to the camera, everything will be in focus anyway. So even though you're shooting 1.4, if you're a long way from that subject, nothing will be out of focus anyway. So that's why wide-angle lenses too can do everything's in focus. So that's one thing you can consider. It would give you the option to shoot in extremely low light. Periscope in a phone. I know, that's incredible. I love that. It is like a periscope, isn't it, though? So we've caught up. Is there anything you'd like to know? Any other questions before we call it a day? I will be live on Friday, well, as long as there's enough news in the Sony world to talk about. So I will have that coming out. I've got a couple of things coming in the next couple of days, I think. There's the LumaCube 2. Which is being sent to me. So I'm looking forward to getting that. There is a monitor that I'm getting as well, which I thought, yeah, why not take a look at that, because I do like using monitors when I'm on gimbals and things. So there's a monitor that I'll be reviewing. And also an I think it's the 360 as well, I think is being sent to me. They were on this Hong Kong holiday, so I've got to contact them again and see if they are still sending me that, because I'd love to review that for you guys. So let me see here what Jamie's saying. Seeing as the A9 II didn't get a big video bump and the A7R4 came out unexpected, do you think the A7S will replace the A7 Mark IV? Who knows? I mean, I'm not sure what Sony's thinking. We might get the A7 Mark IV before we get the A7S III, the way we're going with that. Or they may drop the A7S III out of nowhere like they have with the A7R4. But we just don't know how Sony, are thinking at the moment. What gimbal? I use the Moza Air 2. That's my mostly used gimbal, V for Valley. That's my favourite gimbal. I also like the Moza Air Cross. And the Firetech FK2000 is good as well. But my favourite gimbal of all time is the Moza Air 2. I still love that. And that had a recent firmware come out where now it's added tracking and things like that in it. So they gave a fantastic free firmware that really upped the ante on the Moza Air 2. So that's still my favourite gimbal. That thing is built like a tank. I love it. A7S III is coming and it's going to blow our socks off. Well, we can certainly hope so, Hero. Photomix says, hey, David, what's your opinion on Sony scratching the A7S III and putting better video specs into the A7? They may, Photomiac. They may do that. That might be the thing that they actually do. It's going to be interesting to see which way they move with that camera, and I wouldn't count that out. The interesting thing is that now that the A7 III is out and that can do video at really high ISOs, that really is sort of comparable to the A7S II. I'm not sure if we do need an A7S III, but what we do need is a better video spec camera, and that could be the A7 IV. We don't know which way they're going to... I still think they'll bring out a video camera like an A7S III. Whether that's called that, I don't know. But I still do believe we'll get one because I think they'd still want to separate the low end. The A7 IV will still be the lower end camera and you won't get the video specs in that. You're not going to get 4K 60. You're not going to get that better bit depth rates and things like that. That's going to have to come in a A7S to upgrade. So, I still think we'll see that. I don't think we'll see that in the A7 IV. I think the A7 IV will come, and that will probably be something like a 36 megapixel file size. I think that may be the one where they up the megapixel file size. You'll obviously get the tracking in that camera, things like that. So that's going to be sort of the upgrade from that. It'll be sort of a lower spec version of the A7R4. I think that's what the A7 III is going to be. I feel like Sony should consolidate their camera lines, get rid of the S3. We don't need ISO 1 million. You don't. And I agree with you. We don't need any better ISO, I think, anyway, from the way I shoot. Yes, videographers may say we do. I don't think we need any better ISO than what we've got in today's current cameras. Because particularly videographers, if they're going to work in low light scenarios, they're going to add lighting anyway. You would probably find that very rarely will they shoot just anything without any light at all. They're going to add external lighting. That's what I tend to do. And I'm not a full-on videographer. Usually if I'm lighting something or shooting some video and I've start to push the ISO a bit, I'll usually will bring lighting in and I'll start to light the subject up, put lighting in different areas and add a bit of ambience. So I agree with you. I don't think we need better ISO than what we've got now. I think it's ample now in all of the cameras now to better than what we would normally ever need. Yeah, I agree. Hero says, can they make better video specs, better with firmware update? Possibly, but we're not going to get it. Joe said Sony to release 8mm video film camera to replace the A7 II. Luke said, I need that price drop on the A7 III. Hero says, laugh out loud, A7S III, 1 million ISO so we can shoot a movie in a black hole. I love it. I would be happy with the A7 III if they just gave us unlimited recording. Yeah, you're not going to get that now on that. You'll get that on all the new cameras. You're going to have to upgrade that, I think. We didn't even get that in the A9 update. The A9 I should say, update. There's no way we are going to do that in the mirrorless. We need dual gain ISO, yep. The A7 IV doesn't have to have the low end though. They could keep the A7 III as entry level and make the A7 IV a better camera built for video and great for photo as well. 36 for 8K. Maybe. We just don't know. We do, but there is dual gain ISO for those situations where the camera basically resets the noise floor. Yeah, dual gain ISO is amazing. We just basically have to wait to get it. Hear me out. They could put the 36 megapixel sensor in the A7 IV, still get great low light and better video specs. 4K 60, 10-bit video, everyone is happy. They could. I mean, I think that's definitely a possibility. It certainly doesn't have to be called the A7S anymore. Remember, the A7S was for noise, but how much better in the noise realm can we go? The other thing that you have to understand too is that the A7S line, if they do base it on noise solely, well then you're obviously going to have to, it'll affect the number of megapixels that they can put in that camera. So you may be right, Photomet, but we don't know. We just don't know which way Sony is going to go on this. Will it have a global shutter? We just don't know which way they're going to go. But BBC do better ISO performance to better document. I think you stopped talking there, so I wasn't sure what that is. Which is why you find that in professional video cameras. Yeah, it is. But remember, remember you've got to understand that Sony, particularly Canon, definitely protect their higher-ended cameras, their FF7s and everything else. Nikon don't tend to do that. That's why I say Nikon could be a sleeper here. They have nothing to protect. Panasonic don't seem to hold back. Panasonic seem to be very, very good in what they offer. Fuji also don't have anything to protect. So you might find that Nikon, Panasonic and Fuji bring out amazing video spec cameras because they have nothing to hold back. Panasonic do, but they don't tend to. Canon and Sony definitely are starting to hold things back to protect their high-end line, which is a bit unfortunate. Canon do it worse, but Sony now are also starting to do it as well. So, you know, it's interesting to see which way it's going to go in the future. Where they have to be very, very careful is if Nikon or Panasonic, say if Panasonic brought out a phase detection camera that does what it does now with their specs in it, it would be a killer camera. I'd buy that camera. You know, if Nikon brought out an amazing video camera, like incredible video camera that does 4K 60 internal with the focusing and everything else that it does in that camera, that could be a killer camera as well. So Sony have to be careful that they don't hold back too much, because if they do, they'll be hurt like initially like Canon were. When Sony came in, they held nothing back. Like the A7 III, they held nothing back, and that sold like crazy. If Sony start to hold things back, you might find that it starts to damage sales and people will shift to something like a Nikon. If Canon wake up and bring out an amazing camera that's not got the cripple hammer, as Casey likes to call it, they would sell like hotcakes, and they may eventually wake up. Remember, they've got the best lenses that are available. Their system is fantastic. It's just held up by stupid things like, you know, their crop that they put in and having one single card slot. If they woke up and brought out an amazing camera, they would sell like crazy, and they may do that. We don't know yet. Nick said A7S are good enough for most jobs. Cinema cameras are great, but has time and place. Langston said, hopefully this goes better than the Linux switch. It was a nightmare when things were 64-bit. Yeah, well, that's why I'm waiting. I'm not changing to Catalina until everything's sorted out. That's for sure. Hero said, the people that buy the true cinema cameras aren't looking to switch to an A7S for serious work. And that's about it. We're up to date, basically. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for today's show. Like I said, I hope Aaron gets better soon. That's why I did today's show on my own, because he was sick. I just didn't want to miss another day with you guys, another week like that. Next week, we'll be back at the usual time on Aaron's channel. So make sure you subscribe to Aaron if you aren't, if you want to see it live. I always do copy it and share it on my channel afterwards. But if you want to join live and join in the discussion, you have to basically be on Aaron's channel next week. So apart from that, thanks everyone for a great chat. Leave any comments down below if you weren't part of the chat, and I do always read them and get back to you. Apart from that, love a thumbs up, and I'll see you all for the next video. Bye everyone. Have a great evening and day or whatever.